100 feet below the Atlantic Ocean, Harrison Okene was trapped in a steel tomb. Pitch black, freezing water. He was wearing only his boxer shorts. The Jascon tugboat had sunk 3 days earlier, and he was surviving in a 4-foot-high pocket of air in an upturned bathroom. But the water was slowly rising. The air pocket was shrinking. He was starving. He was dying of thirst. His skin was peeling off from the salt water, and then he heard the noises. It wasn't the sound of rescue. It was the sound of large fish, barracudas or sharks, fighting outside the cabin. They were feeding on the bodies of his crewmates. Harrison was certain he was going to die. He prayed, reciting the Psalms his wife had texted him just before the disaster. He had no food, no water, only a single bottle of Coca-Cola he had found floating past. Suddenly, a hammering sound echoed through the wreck. Then, a beam of light pierced the absolute darkness. A diver swam into the cabin. He was part of the saturation diving team sent to recover the dead. They were not looking for survivors. It was impossible for anyone to be alive after 72 hours at this depth. Harrison, delirious and weak, reached out and touched the diver. The diver recoiled in horror, thinking a corpse had just grabbed him. In that moment, Harrison Okene wasn't just fighting the ocean, he was fighting the assumption that he was already dead. And getting him out alive would require a miracle of physics and biology. May 26, 2013. Off the coast of Nigeria, Harrison Okene was 29 years old and the cook aboard the Jascon 4. It was a tough job, but Harrison was good at it. He kept the 12-man crew fed while they performed a difficult operation, stabilizing a massive Chevron oil tanker in rough seas, about 20 miles offshore. Harrison wasn't just working for a paycheck. He was working for his future with his wife, Akpovona. They were to be married 5 years and trying to start a family. This trip was supposed to be his last for a while. He was scheduled for leave in 3 days. He was already thinking about going home, seeing his mother, eating his favorite banga soup. The night before the incident, the weather was getting worse. The swells were heavy. Harrison spoke to Akpovona on the phone. Before they hung up, she sent him a text message. A selection of Bible verses, Psalms 54 to 92, often called the Prayer of Deliverance. He read them before going to sleep. Harrison was always an early riser. At 4:30 a.m. he woke up, he said his morning prayers as he always did, then he headed toward the galley to turn on the hot plates for breakfast. But first, he needed to use the bathroom. He was still wearing only his boxer shorts. He stepped into the small toilet cubicle and closed the door. That decision saved his life. Off the Nigerian coast, piracy is a constant threat. Standard procedure on the Jascon 4 was for the crew to lock their cabin doors at night. At 4:30 a.m., 11 men were locked in. Only Harrison was moving through the ship. As he sat in the bathroom, a massive rogue wave slammed into the Jascon 4. The tugboat didn't just rock, it was violently thrown sideways. The speed of the capsizing was terrifying. Inside the cubicle, Harrison was thrown against the wall. The toilet broke free and struck him on the head. He saw blood, then the lights died. Total darkness. Water flooded the small room. Harrison struggled to open the door against the immense pressure. When he forced the door open, the ship was completely upside down. Propellers up, wheelhouse down. He scrambled into the dark hallway, and he found 2 or 3 of his colleagues battling to open an emergency exit. Water rushed in with incredible force. 3 guys were in front of me, Harrison recalled, and suddenly, water rushed in full force. I saw the first one, the second one, the third one, just washed away. I knew these guys were dead. The ocean was sucking them out. Harrison was next. In a split-second decision, Harrison made a counterintuitive choice. Instead of waiting at the hatch, he turned away. He let the water sweep him deeper into the sinking vessel. The surge carried him down a narrow passageway. The Jascon 4 hit the seabed with a dull thud 100 feet below the surface. Harrison was swept into another toilet, this one attached to the second engineer's cabin. The door slammed shut behind him. He was trapped. The room was filling with water. He gasped for air, but to his amazement, the water stopped rising. In the absolute darkness, he realized he was still breathing. The ship had landed perfectly upside down. Because the cabin doors were sealed tight, ironically due to the anti-privacy measures, a pocket of air had been trapped in the room when the ship flipped. He was in a tiny air bubble, about 4 feet high. The ceiling was now the floor. Harrison, always a practical man, immediately assessed the situation. He was alive, but he was in immediate danger. The water was freezing. At 100 feet deep, the temperature was near zero. Wearing only boxers, hypothermia would kill him quickly. He had to get out of the water. He found the overturned wash basin and clung to it, pulling his torso out of the icy seawater, keeping his head in the precarious air pocket. He was alone. He called out the names of his crewmates, but silence. "I couldn't hear them anymore," he said. At first, he assumed they had escaped. He didn't realize that he was the only one left alive on the Jascon 4. The reality of his situation began to set in. He was at the bottom of the ocean. No one knew where he was. No one was coming for him. He was trapped in a parallel world. Sensory deprivation was total. There was no light. The only sound was the noisy churning of the water around him and the faint, muffled hum of vessels moving on the surface far above. Hour after hour passed. The cold was unbearable. Clinging to the wash basin wasn't enough. The water was still drawing the heat from his body. He needed a better solution. He started searching the cabin, groping in the darkness. He found some tools and a life vest with 2 flashlights. But the batteries were dead. Useless. He needed to build a platform. He found 2 mattresses floating in the cabin and managed to pile them on top of some submerged furniture. It was unstable, but it got him higher out of the water. He lay on the makeshift raft, shivering uncontrollably. The physical toll was immediate. The salt water was burning his skin. He had swallowed a lot of seawater during the sinking, and his throat throbbed. His tongue felt swollen and peeled. Hunger and thirst became agonizing. He desperately searched the adjoining officer's cabin again. By some miracle, he found a single unopened bottle of Coca-Cola floating by. This was his only sustenance. 1 bottle of Coke to survive an infinite imprisonment. As the first day bled into the second, the physical pain was replaced by psychological terror. He thought about Akpavona. How is she feeling? How will the world treat her? He thought about the children they hadn't yet had. Everything was thoughts and memories before his eyes. He began to pray. He recited the verses his wife had sent him, Psalm 54. "O God, by your name, save me." He sang church songs in the darkness, trying to keep his mind from breaking. One thing that can kill you fast is fear, he knew. He had to kill the fear. But the ocean had other horrors in store. He started hearing noises outside the hull, scraping, thudding, tearing sounds. At first, he thought it might be rescuers, but the sounds were too aggressive, too chaotic. He realized what it was. The wreck had attracted predators. Sharks, barracudas, large groupers. They were fighting over something big. They were feeding on the bodies of his friends trapped in the other cabins. The sound of his colleagues being eaten echoed through the steel tomb. If that wasn't enough, smaller creatures began to attack him inside the cabin. Crayfish and small crustaceans were nibbling at his legs, torso, and arms, creating small wounds on his peeling skin. He was being eaten alive, slowly, and all the time, the water level was rising. The air pocket wasn't perfectly sealed. Slowly, agonizingly, the water was compressing the air, creeping up the walls. His precious oxygen supply was dwindling. But oxygen depletion wasn't the only threat. In a confined space, carbon dioxide poisoning happens long before the oxygen runs out. Every breath Harrison took converted oxygen into CO2. Experts estimate that he had roughly 56 hours before CO2 toxicity set in. After 79 hours, he would fall unconscious and die. The fact was, he was living on borrowed time. Sometime on the second day, time had lost all meaning for Harrison. He heard a new sound. The distinct rumble of a boat engine on the surface and the clang of an anchor dropping. Hope surged through him. Rescuers. He had to signal them. He couldn't just shout. He needed to make a noise that they could hear through the hull. He swam down into the freezing water, searching the cabin again. He found a water dispenser. He pulled the water filter out. It was heavy, like a small hammer. He waded across the cabin. The walls were covered in paneling. He ripped the paneling off, exposing the bare steel hull. He hammered, boom, 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 on the side of the vessel, desperately hoping that someone would hear him. But the rescuers on the surface weren't equipped for a deep water operation. They were likely just a preliminary search team, perhaps marking the location of the wreck. He heard the engines start up again. The sound moved away. They were far away from where I was. This was the lowest point. He had been so close and they had missed him. He realized the size of the boat. It would take a miracle for anyone to locate his tiny air pocket in this massive wreck. He climbed back onto his raft. He was sure he was going to die. He accepted his fate, praying for his soul and for his family. By now he knew his relatives would have been told that he was dead. And day 3 began. Harrison was weak, delirious. He was well past the 56-hour mark. CO2 toxicity was likely setting in. He was breathing heavily, his body screaming for clean air. Meanwhile, 72 hours away, a specialized dive support vessel, the Toucan, received the deployment orders. On board was a team from DNC Diving, a mix of Dutch and South African saturation divers. This team was highly specialized. They lived in a pressurized environment on board the ship, allowing them to work at extreme depths for long periods of time. When the call came, they were already saturated, meaning their bodies were acclimatized to high pressure, for a different pipeline project. They immediately began the 17-hour voyage to the Jascon 4 wreckage site. During the journey, they adjusted their saturation pressure to match the 30-meter or 100-foot depth of the wreck. Their mission was clear, and it was grim. Body recovery. No one expected survivors. They were there to bring the 12 dead crew members home. The divers descended in a diving bell, connected to the surface by a long umbilical, supplying breathing gas, hot water for their suits, communications, and power. They reached the wreck. The Jascon 4 was upside down, embedded in the mud. Visibility was poor. The divers began the methodical, dangerous work of cutting into the wreck. They knew the risks. The interior was a maze of debris and entanglement hazards, so they started recovering the bodies. 1, 2, 3, 4. The mood on the support vessel was somber. Inside the engineer's cabin, Harrison heard a new sound. A loud hammering on the deck, much closer this time. Boom, boom, boom. It wasn't the rhythmic banging of hope. It was the sound of heavy equipment cutting through steel. Harrison knew this was his last chance. He grabbed his makeshift hammer, the water filter, and banged back on the hull with all his remaining strength. On the surface, in the control room of the Toucan, the dive supervisor was monitoring the divers' helmet cameras. One of the divers, Nico van Heerden, paused. He thought he heard something, a faint hammering reply. But it couldn't be. Nico swam into the murky interior of the wreck, following the sound. Harrison saw a disturbance in the darkness, a reflection of light like a bubble. A beam from a head torch pierced the cabin. He saw the diver swimming past the room. Harrison slipped off his raft and into the water. He swam toward the light. Nico was focused on his search, moving through the debris, and on the helmet camera footage, a pale hand suddenly appears out of the darkness, floating in the water. The diver assumed it was another corpse. Then the hand moved. Harrison reached out and touched the diver. Nico physically recoiled, shivering from fear. He thought a corpse had grabbed him. It was a shock for the diver looking for bodies, and the team in the control room actually all jumped when the hand grabbed him on the screen. Harrison, realizing he had scared the diver, quickly pulled his hand back. He worried the diver might panic. Instead, he waved his hand directly in front of the diver's camera, signaling to the crew on the surface. The realization hit the control room. The exclamation from the diver echoed over the comms, "There's a survivor. He's alive." Nico swam fully into the cabin. He found Harrison, scared, cold, but alive, sitting in the air pocket. The immediate reaction was joy, but the situation was incredibly dangerous. Harrison was alive, but he was far from saved. The rescue team faced a massive complication. Harrison couldn't simply be brought to the surface. He had been breathing at 100 feet of depth for nearly 3 days. At that depth, the pressure is 4 times greater than that of the surface. His body had absorbed a massive amount of nitrogen. His tissues were saturated. If they brought him straight up, the rapid decrease in pressure would cause the nitrogen to bubble out of his blood, like opening a shaken soda can. This is decompression sickness, or the bends. In Harrison's case, it wouldn't just be painful, it would be instantly fatal. His heart wouldn't be able to pump, and he would die before he even reached the surface. He needed to be rescued using saturation dive techniques. The divers had to stabilize him first, and he was severely hypothermic. They used their hot water lines, normally used to heat their suits, to gently warm him up. They reassured him, patting him on the shoulder. "What's your name?" Nico asked. "Harrison." "Harrison, I'm going to bring you home, okay? You mustn't panic." They carefully fitted him with a diving helmet and a harness. This provided him with a steady supply of breathing gas from the surface. The extraction was slow and difficult. Harrison was weak and disorientated. He had to swim out of the wreck through the maze of dark, debris-filled hallways. He had never dived before, and the experience was terrifying. Nico guided him patiently. "Put your head underwater and breathe comfortably, okay?" They swam toward the diving bell, which was waiting outside the wreck. Harrison, terrified, clung to the diver's umbilical line. Finally, they reached the diving bell. Harrison climbed inside. The pressurized environment inside the bell matched the pressure of the wreck. He was safe from the bends. The diver gave him a thumbs up. "Good job, my friend. Well done. You're a survivor." The diving bell was raised to the surface and mated with the decompression chamber system on the Lueck toucan. Harrison's ordeal was still not over. He had survived 3 days at the bottom of the ocean, but now he had to endure the slow process of decompression. He spent another 60 hours, 2.5 days, inside the pressurized chamber while the pressure was gradually reduced, allowing the nitrogen to slowly and safely leave his body. When the medical team checked his vital signs, they were astonished. Despite the extreme trauma, his temperature and blood pressure were normal. It was during his time in the chamber that the rescue team told him the full extent of the disaster. He had been underwater for nearly 3 days. He had no sense of having passed even a single night. And then they told him about the crew. 10 bodies were recovered, 1 still missing. Harrison Okene was the sole survivor of the Jascon 4. He broke down and cried. He had thought they had escaped. He realized he was the only one who had made it out. Finally, after nearly 6 days since the sinking, Harrison Okene emerged from the decompression chamber and breathed fresh air. He refused advice to go to the hospital. He just wanted to go home. He wanted to see Akpavona. His survival was hailed as a miracle, a phenomenon. But the experience left deep scars. For weeks, the nights were besieged by nightmares. "As I slept, I felt the bed sinking," he said. He would wake up in a panic, grab his wife, and try to open the door to get out. He vowed never to go to sea again. The trauma was too great. But Harrison Okene possessed an incredible resilience. He had faced the abyss and survived. 2 years after the incident, he confronted his fear in the most direct way imaginable. He became a certified commercial diver, joining the ranks of the men who saved his life, proving that the water that almost destroyed him could also be his domain. You won't believe what the people in these next 2 stories did to survive. Click now to see what they did to stay alive, and ask yourself, could you do the same? Subscribe for more, and I'll see you soon.